Most people think they're making decisions. They're not. They're reacting. They're following. They're copying what they see around them. They're waiting for the perfect moment, and they call all of that deciding. It isn't. Here's the honest truth. The quality of your life is not determined by your talent, your luck, or your timing. It's determined by the quality of your decisions. Every day, in small moments that don't feel important, until 5 years later when you look back and realize that was exactly where the path split. And here's what's wild. Most people are making those decisions at the lowest possible level, and they have no idea levels even exist. Niccolò Machiavelli spent his life watching people, leaders, failures, people with every advantage who lost everything, people with nothing who built something real. And what he kept finding, over and over, was never about who knew more. It was always about who thought better. That's the gap. How you think when things are unclear. How you decide when the answer isn't obvious. How you move when the stakes are real and the outcome isn't guaranteed. That's what separates the person going somewhere from the person stuck in the same place year after year. Today we're going through 6 levels of thinking, 6 ways people process decisions. Where you sit on this right now is quietly shaping your money, your relationships, your direction, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Most people never even know this ladder exists. By the end of this, you will. Before we move forward, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I choose with clarity. Let's go. Level 1. Default decisions. This is where most people are, and most of them don't know it. At level 1, you're not really making decisions. You're just repeating. You're doing what you did yesterday, what you did last year, what you've always done. Not because you thought it through, but because it's familiar, and familiar feels safe. Same job, same spending habits, same way of responding when things go wrong, same opinions you've held for years without ever questioning them. None of it is actually chosen. It's just continued. Your brain does this on purpose. Making a real decision takes energy. Your brain is designed to conserve that energy whenever possible, so it finds the pattern it already knows and repeats it. The problem is when that same autopilot takes over the decisions that actually matter. Your career, your money, your relationships, your direction in life. These things are not static. The world around you keeps moving. And if your decisions aren't actually changing with it, you're falling behind, not because you're failing, just because you're standing still while everything else moves. Think about someone who stays in a job they hate for 5 years, not because they love it, not because they thought it through and decided to stay, just because leaving would require making a choice, and making a choice feels risky, so they just keep going back. That's level 1. And it feels like living, but it's really just old decisions running on repeat. The moment you realize this is happening, that's already growth. Most people never even get there. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I break old patterns. Level 2. Imitation-based thinking. So someone wakes up from autopilot. They look around. They think, I need to change something. And the most natural next step is to look at the people ahead of them and copy what they're doing. That's level 2. You see someone doing well, and you think, I'll do what they do. You watch a trend pick up and you think, that must be the direction. You hear about a lifestyle, a career move, a financial strategy that worked for someone, and you think, I'll follow that path. And honestly, this is better than nothing. You're paying attention now. You're trying to learn from the world around you instead of just running on habit. That's real progress. But here's the flaw. Imitation ignores context. Every decision that works does so inside a very specific situation. That person's background, resources, timing, skills, market, relationships, all of that shapes the outcome. When you copy the decision without copying the context, you're not making the same decision. You're making a surface-level version of it that's missing everything that made it work. Someone sees a person who made money in real estate and jumps in, without the same capital, the same market conditions, or the same knowledge base. Someone copies a morning routine that works for a multimillionaire and wonders why their life doesn't change, not realizing that routine is the result of a completely different set of circumstances. The decision looks the same on the outside, but it isn't. And there's another problem. When you imitate what's popular, you're competing in the most crowded lane. Everyone sees the same success stories. Everyone copies the same moves. You're not getting ahead. You're joining the back of a long line. The people who actually pull away from the pack usually make decisions that look different from what everyone else is doing, because they're thinking about their specific situation, not borrowing someone else's answer. Imitation-based thinking feels safe because you can point to evidence. It worked for them. But that's not the same as thinking it through for yourself. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My path is mine. Level 3. Information-heavy thinking. Here's where things start to look more serious. At level 3, you stop copying and start researching. You read, you watch, you listen. You ask people who know more than you. You gather data before you move. This is genuinely better. You're reducing obvious mistakes. You're building real context. You come into situations more prepared and you ask smarter questions. But level 3 has a ceiling, and a lot of people hit it without understanding why they're still stuck. The problem is this. More information does not automatically mean better decisions. There's a point where you have enough to make a reasonable call, and past that point, more information doesn't bring clarity. It brings noise. One source says one thing. Another source says the opposite. A third one adds 5 more variables, and now the decision feels more complicated than when you started. You know more. You're less clear. This is analysis paralysis, and it's extremely common among people who think they're being thorough. They keep researching, keep reading, keep gathering, and the decision keeps getting pushed back. Here's the deeper issue. Information tells you what is. It doesn't tell you what to do about it. A doctor can have every lab result and every scan, and still face a decision the data alone can't answer. A business owner can have every market report and still not know whether to launch now or wait. Data is input. The decision is still yours to make. And if you're honest about it, sometimes information gathering isn't research, it's avoidance. Deciding is uncomfortable. Research feels productive. So people keep researching instead of deciding, and they feel responsible while they do it, and time keeps passing. Level 3 thinking is real progress, but it needs a stopping point. Because perfect information doesn't exist. It never will. At some point you have to ask, not, do I have everything? But do I have enough to make a reasonable move? That's the shift that gets you to level 4. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I act despite uncertainty. Level 4. Trade-off awareness. This is where thinking gets genuinely sharp. At level 4, you stop looking for the perfect option. You accept that every choice has a cost, and the real question is which cost you can live with. Most people understand opportunity cost in theory. Level 4. Thinkers actually use it when they decide. Here's what it sounds like in your head at this level. Not just, what does this give me? But what does this cost me? And what am I walking away from by choosing this over something else? When you take a job, you're not just gaining a salary. You're trading 40+ hours a week, your energy, your time, your flexibility, your mornings, every other thing you could have done with that time, gone. When you say yes to something, you're automatically saying no to everything else that slot of time could have held. When you take on a financial commitment, a lease, a loan, you're not just accessing something. You're reducing your future options by whatever that payment demands every month. Every decision is a trade, always. There's no version of deciding that doesn't include giving something up. And once you really accept that, two things happen. First, you decide faster, because you're not waiting for an option with no downside anymore. You know no such option exists, so you just evaluate which trade you're most okay with and you move. Second, you have fewer regrets, not because things always go well, but because you went in with open eyes. You knew what you were trading, you accepted it. So when something doesn't go perfectly, you're not blindsided. You understood the deal. Machiavelli thought this way constantly. He never analyzed a decision as just a move towards something. He always saw it as simultaneously moving away from something else. Every alliance gained meant another door closed. Every enemy made was a calculation about what it cost versus what it produced. That dual awareness, what you gain and what you give up, is what this level produces. And here's what's freeing about it. When you accept that every path has trade-offs, you stop feeling like you're failing when things aren't perfect. You chose one set of costs over another. That's what a decision is. Stop looking for the path with no friction. It doesn't exist. Start looking for the friction you're most willing to deal with. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I trade wisely always. Level 5, Probability Thinking. This level changes how you relate to outcomes entirely. At level 5, you stop asking, will this work? And start asking, how likely is this to work? Sounds like a small shift. It isn't. Will this work? Is a yes or no question. And since you almost never have a guaranteed yes, that question usually either forces false confidence or freezes you completely. Neither is useful. How likely is this to work is a different question. It takes you out of the certainty trap and puts you into realistic thinking. Now you're evaluating odds, you're thinking in probabilities, and that's a completely different way to operate. Here's what that looks like practically. Say you're thinking about starting something on the side while keeping your current job. If you ask, will this work? You might talk yourself out of it. Most side projects don't take off. That's discouraging, hard to move forward. But if you ask, how likely is this to work for me specifically? Now you actually think it through. What skills do you have that are relevant here? What time can you realistically commit? Have you tested the idea even in a small way? What's the actual market for what you're offering? Now you're not looking at some vague general stat. You're assessing your actual situation, and you might find the odds are reasonable, not certain, not guaranteed, but good enough to try. Or you might find they're not, and that's useful too, because now you know what needs to change before the odds shift. This is how professionals in high-stakes fields think. A doctor doesn't say, this treatment will definitely work. They say, based on this patient's situation, this gives the best odds. An investor doesn't say, this will go up. They say, the risk-to-reward ratio is in my favor here. A coach doesn't say, we'll definitely win. They say, this game plan gives us the best shot. That's not weakness or hedging, that's precise thinking. And emotionally, it changes things too. When you think in probabilities, Outcomes don't hit you as hard when they go wrong. Because you never told yourself they were guaranteed. You made a smart bet. Sometimes smart bets lose. That's not a failure of your decision. That's just how odds work. Here's something most people miss. Making a high-probability decision that doesn't work out is still good decision-making. If you make 10 decisions that each had a 70% chance of success and 3 of them fail, you didn't decide badly. You decided